How's it going, everybody? This is Trey Bell. This is Arcane Frequencies. I'm with Jonathan Critford of the new musical chairs, and this is part two of the Foetus videos. Um, Back from part one, we ended up leaving off on the last, like about I think the fifth Foetus album because that's the only one that I had gotten to at the time. So I've completely listened to everything except the official last Foetus album, which forgot what it was called. I think it was Soak.
Yeah,
There are no, well, there are you can get it online, but you have to buy it, I think, off of Bandcamp. So I may be willing to like buy it in the future, but just not right now.
yeah, it's a tough one to track down actually. I think I can't remember off the top of my head now without looking it up, but I think it was on quite a small. I don't even think it was on a label actually. I think it was. I think Jim actually put it out. Let's just have a quick look actually. It did come out on a label. It came out on Ectopic Ents, which uh, is very I'm gonna have to. I'll tell you what. I'll look at this as we're kind of talking and trying to learn a bit more about it because I don't know a lot about that album either, other than the few tracks that I've heard. Um, but yeah, it's been a really interesting listen because Trey and I have kind of had to. We were going to do this a few weeks ago, and we've both been quite busy, so it's kind of taken a bit of a back seat. But it's been good coming back to these because the catalogue slices quite nicely. I kind of think Thor feels like the end of phase one, even though all those records, the first three kind of have a fairly linear continuity, if you could ever describe what Jim does as linear in any way, which you can't, but I suppose what I mean is those first three records all feel like they flow, Death, Ache and Hole, and Nail as well actually, all feel like they flow into each other quite naturally. And then Thor kind of is almost like this big coming out of his conventional side. But that feels very much, and it kind of caps off the 80s releases as well. Jim would obviously do plenty of other things in the interim, but we're just focusing on the Foetus stuff here today. And I think it also, when you get to Gash in '95, which will be the first thing we'll talk about, it's the first time he drops the pseudonyms and he's just calling himself Foetus, basically from now all the way through to the end of the up to Soak, which as of now is the last one he did. And it's unclear as to whether he'll do more because he was kind of putting out albums as Foetus consistently, um, and that's really it's now 11 years since that. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But it's been good going back and listening to these for sure.
Yeah, my first like interpretation of Gash when I had listened to it, because like again, after I got through the first five Fetus albums, I kind of took a break. Again, like we were saying, just busy and with other stuff in our lives, and I was just like listening to like the regular music I listened to. But returning back to Fetus, like starting out with Gash. I definitely, the first thing I could tell by listening to this had more of like a rock based type of aesthetic to it. Again, there always was a traditional chaoticness that you already were hearing from the original Fetus projects, but it feels like, and we kind of said this both with Thaw, it's like things are kind of coming together, and Gas seems like even more progression into like the Fetus sound coming together and sounding more fluid, like he knows exactly what he's doing now
Yeah,
that the sound is like fully encapsulated in like um his skill sets with like what he's doing specifically with Fetus, but also knowing that Jim does a lot of stuff outside of Fetus, either with him just as a solo artist, just going under the name Jim Thirwell, which I haven't checked any of that stuff out yet, but I know again, like a lot of people in this category of music that we've been talking about on the channel, like they collaborate with whole myriads of people and probably do all different type of artistic expressions. So the first thing I was able to get from listening to this was that this definitely sounds like he's taking all those influences and really honing in to a sound that I think he really wanted to get to. And I feel like from this point on, it just continues with that. You still hear the Foetus sound, but you can definitely tell there's other influences coming from other projects or other, off skirt stuff that he was doing during those time frames in that particular hiatus.
Yeah, it feels like a real sort of. I think Nail and Thor are probably the first times, and I think we said this last time. They're the first occasions where it felt like Jim had worked out how to take the chaos of that early stuff and keep it chaotic while giving it a fairly kind of robust spine. And Gash is definitely a continuation of that. I mean, you know, it's his first. It's interestingly his first record for Sony. This was made for Sony Records, um, and I don't know what they thought they were signing when they ended up with this. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a straighter. Structurally, it's straighter, and you know, but these aren't catchy 4 minute pop songs by any stretch of the imagination. And some of them don't even use kind of pop rock instruments. Hammer Falls is sort of there's Arabic kind of wailing on there. There's sitar on it as well. And then you've got Slung, which is like a 11 minute sort of, I don't know, nightmare American swing thing. Um, and it's interesting that you mentioned the influence of outside influences generally, because there's quite a big cast of guest musicians on this, whereas Thor was all him, with some help on the production side. I'm just looking down the credits now, and there are a lot of people on this one, um, and they all come from varying backgrounds. Vinny Signorelli from Swans is on here on a couple of
Ooh,
tracks
nice.
playing drums, but there's a real sense of kind of finding ways to, I don't know, hone the chaos of those early. Thor was very much a kind of a direct hit on his ability to write pop music when he felt compelled to, whereas this is kind of getting back to almost the way that Foetus began, but with a much clearer vision in mind. It feels like, rather than
Yeah.
just kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Um, it's a really, there's a lot of brutality on here, as there is with a lot of this stuff. But I know a lot of people hold this one in high regard as sort of the peak of his creativity, and I can see why people think that. Definitely.
Yeah, like again, I went through all these albums just once, and probably in the future, when I'm feel compelled to, I probably will try to like uh revisit some of these albums. I do have my favorites um whenever I do go through like brief like skims of it. But I do feel like Gash is like the one that is starting off like this new like era of Fetus. And for the most part, I think the while I do understand why people regard this as like one of his best, I think personally for me, like I still am missing like the melodicness of like some of his other songs. And so like that's probably why it didn't fully resonate with me. But at the same time, like I feel the progression, and like I was like, all right, this is definitely is like entering to a new realm. So like I can't wait to see where he goes from that. And then from Gash to Flow, I feel like Flow is honestly what I would say is like he's literally has everything together, because as you can even like the name itself, it's just like everything is flowing perfectly together when it comes to the Fetus sound. It's like I feel it's like I've heard these before, like this aesthetic before, and I'm not really thinking that much about what's going on, because like I already know what's going on because like we've gone through at least like 6 albums at this point. And this, I would say Flow honestly feels more like an earlier Fetus album than even Gash, but like it's really like honing in on like all the things that like he was doing right, in pockets of the earlier albums. And it's just like it's pretty much, I feel like Flow is like the bow on the present of like what he always wanted to do. It just feels very smooth, and that he's officially established the sound. And the one thing I love about Flow, and this is one of my favorite albums from him, like from what I've been listening to when I was like making a top 5 list of favorite Fetus albums. Uh like I can tell he's starting to like get into like that music scoring that you probably hear on like Venture Bros and stuff like that on certain pockets of these songs. Specifically the last song. Hold up, let me see if I can find what that name of that song is. Where it's like I think it's like an 8-minute song or 12 minutes. And I just absolutely like, if anything, it's my hold up, you all. I think it's called, oh, I don't know how to pronounce that. Crebabe, something.
Yeah, I've not worked it out either. My initial thought when I looked at it was that it was a play on Crybaby, but I don't know if it is. But yeah, I completely agree with you. Similarly with Mandalay, Cirrhosis of the Heart as well. Um, these are just awesome pieces, and I
Yes.
think they. You're right that he was tapping into that soundtrack side, um, and for the first time, this feels like it. It feels like he was just able to um, use everything at his because the one thing you can never take away from him is how creative he is, just generally, like we were saying last time, if he wants to write a catchy piece of pop music, he can do that. If he wants to be brutal and industrial, he can do that. And he can do a million things in between. What he seems to have found a way with Flow is he's able to create narrative pieces. They all tell their own story. They have their own little self-contained universe in there, and that's perhaps something that you don't get as clearly any of the records up to now. And like you said, when we were putting top fives together, this was going to be a contender from the off. And actually, listening to this again was a real surprise of just how good this is. And the one that I would say, if you wanted to kind of get to know his work, this would be probably the one I would give people.
Yeah, like another like because I recently like kind of went through some of the songs a few days ago off of Flow, and I realized like the reason why I put this in like my top 5 is because I think this is like the best representation of his earlier sounds when you're thinking about the whole, the nail, and even like, Death and forgot the other one, but like that, it feels like it's those particular albums before Thaw done like in a very like a fine knit type of way where it's just like he's going back to form, but he knows exactly what he's doing. And again, hence in the name, like everything's flowing together. Because it's just like because I would say like outside of like the fact that some of my favorite albums off of like the Fetus catalog are the ones that kind of like are past like like well Thought, and then like anything past that are like my favorite, but I still appreciated what he was doing on those earlier projects. It's just most of the time when I'm like listening to him, I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and I'm probably not, and I think he's trying to figure out what's going on. So it's just like we're all like kind of in a new experience together where it's just like he took a break from that experience, kind of started doing some other stuff and making a cohesive sound with the Fetus project, went back to it, and now this is what I feel like, you know, hole and nail in anything before then should should sound like if he actually knew what he was doing in the beginning. And so I like yeah, I think I place Flow as my notes out. Is it? Oh wait. Yeah, I placed it as number three on
Mm.
my top five. But
I will. I'll read mine through at the end because one of the ones we haven't talked about yet is in there. But yeah, it's a fantastic collection. This, and I think it's like I said before. Perhaps it's the one where if somebody was to ask me, give me one record by Jim Thirlwell as Foetus, it would probably be this one. It's
yeah,
not my personal favourite, but it's probably this one.
yeah, I totally
Um,
agree.
and that came out in 2001. And doing some digging, Self-Immolation Records was um, a, a label run by Jim Thirlwell, basically. So he set it up um, as a vanity label to have Foetus releases go through on their own under some bizarre records, which is kind of where he started out. And much the same with Ectopic Entertainment and Ectopic Ants, which Soap came out through. So all these things are independent releases at this point. Flow,
Yeah.
like I said, came out. That had a major label. Sorry, Dash had a major label release. That obviously didn't last very long because with Flow, we're back with Thirsty Ear, which is another independent release. But yeah, fantastic album. And which is interesting because then when you get to Love, which was 4 years later, so that's 2005, um, this is an interesting one because it's quite a shift tonally. It's
Yeah, just
more atmospheric and more emotional, I think. Um, and yet at the same time, I like this record a lot, and this was probably the one that surprised me most going back to
same,
it.
same.
Yeah, um, he feels in spots like he's like somebody who's quite content to just be making records at this point. And I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, but the pieces feel less daring, I would say.
Yeah.
However, there is some excellent stuff on here. Like I said, it's far more emotional, really, than anything he's done probably up to this point, really. There are additional vocals on there by Jennifer Charles, and I think he's still kind of um, using interesting instruments. There's theremin on there that you can hear, um, trumpet, but most of the most of the kind of lyrical stuff on this record comes from strings again, and those kind of film noir esque soundtrack things that he is getting increasingly good at doing by this point. Um, what did you think of this?
Well, I know you're gonna do your top five at the end, but I had to say out of every Fetus project, this is my favorite Fetus album, which again, it surprised me a lot because like it's one of there's a few like throughout my music history and like the things that I love about music, there's certain albums where I love something right away and it's pure ecstasy all the way through. And I don't know what it is about love that like, got to me because like I was not expecting this to like, affect me in the way that it did. And because like in my head, I'm thinking like, all right, where will he go next after Flow? Is it just going to be like more plateauing, like not in a bad way, but like is the sound just going to progress to like be well established and he adds a few different things like, oh no, he totally went a completely different direction in my opinion, and it's beautiful. Like I don't feel like I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Like it's definitely still unique, but there's something about this album that just kind of connected with me that not a lot of projects do, even when it comes to like my favorite artists. Like this really just sank in to me in a way where it's just like I felt so immersed and like nothing else around me actually mattered because like I don't know. I think it's I don't know like what the instrumentations he used on here. Like it has like kind of like an Asian musical type of feel. Hence like, how he did the lettering like, it's like is it Japanese? I can't like the lettering that he did on
I
the
think
album
so.
cover.
Yeah, I think so.
Like it has like an Asian type of feel to it where he's like using like different instrumentations from like that culture. And I don't know what he was doing during this point in his life that like really influenced him. Like if anything, it makes me think like I know this is kind of like somewhat like a weird comparison, but it makes me think about like George Harrison from the Beatles when he got into like in Indian music and added those elements to the Beatles catalog around like, the psychedelic era like Sergeant Pepper's and just you have like a person who's known for doing these types of things and then they go off and go to a different experience and bring those culture experience into like their current day, like their current sound and like really experiment with them. And I don't know what it is about this album, but I just absolutely love it. Like no pun intended, but I really love this album, not even just as a Fetus project. Hold up. Hello? What? No, sorry. Could you walk him? All right. Sorry, my grandma asked me if I walk my
Yeah,
dog.
no
I
worries.
forgot to. But no, it's just like, yeah, I absolutely love this project. I need to go through it again because like it's the fact that like it just took one listen for me just to like, you know, fully appreciate it than like the other albums. It's just this is a special album for me, and I think I need to. It's gonna make me want to go through the Fetus catalog again and figure out like why is this the one that stands out.
It's an interesting comparison too that you said about George Harrison because I think that um, he this is quite I think a lot of people who aren't sort of big Beatles fans forget he was the one really who introduced that style of music to the band and so by extension the world because nobody was doing that when he did that and he brought the sitar in on Rubber Soul and things like that and he was the one who was the first to kind of do the real avant-garde stuff, with Wonderwall music and those kind of solo offshoot things. Um, and in that regard, it's not a bad comparison at all for Jim. And I think that it's almost like he is the other side of the same coin with George Harrison insofar as George Harrison had all these outsider art urges that were tempered by his approach to just writing incredible pop songs. Whereas Jim is quite the opposite of that, is that his natural environment is to kind of almost be within creative chaos and the pop element or the uh, less chaotic elements. He has to kind of go searching for those. Um, but when he does find them, as he does on here, it's just I think, like I said, Flow and this, I think, prove his innate musicality and his ability to forego pure self expression in favour of trying to say something a little bit more specific. And
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. It's a wonderful album.
All right. So next album, based on the Wikipedia catalog, it's I guess it goes into Vain, but I didn't really listen to that one because I think it was just like a remix album to more
Yeah, I tend not to count that.
yeah.
It is a remix album. I have listened to it and there's some good spots on it, but Hyde is where it kind of really
Yeah.
happens again. What did you think of this one?
Hyde, okay, so like I said, about like 3 days ago before we did this video, I had listened to this for the first time. And of course like weren't gonna listen to Soak, so this to me kind of feels like, somewhat of like a introduction to the grand finale of the Fetus catalog
Yeah,
until like we do listen to Soak. But this, in a weird way, like if it's kind of strangely nostalgic to me now that I have the background knowing that Jim Thirwell worked on Venture Bros. And this makes me feel like I'm a kid again watching
yeah,
a Venture Bros episode, and it's pure theatrics. It's like the curation of every song just feels so
yeah,
like I'm like the whole entire time I'm just like I feel like I'm back in 2007 or
yeah,
something, watching Adult Swim and watching a random Venture Bros episode that just came on, and that's all I can see or hear in my head. And it just has Jim Thirlwell in it because like at this point, like, because this is 2010, so yeah, he's definitely has like been a part of like working with, you know, Adult Swim and, working on more like show scores or movie scores and stuff like that. And so for this one, it just and not to like lessen like his creativity in a sense, but it kind of just feels like a Venture Bros like music album featuring Jim Thirlwell. And the reason why I say that is because it's more about the curation and the orchestration of like the sounds. Like you still hear his voice in the mix, but it's, if anything, this feels like the most like non-Fetus project, just because of like where I can tell the sounds are associated, and that he's really honing, like he just wanted to bring what he took from working on Venture Bros type of like music and just put it into Fetus.
yeah. I agree, and there are two things on here that especially mentioning the Beatles, especially, there are two things on here that I love: Paper Slippers and Oh Putrid Sun. Um, Great melodies on those, and again, his ability to kind of twist that form, I think, is his greatest strength. Um, I'm less familiar with Venture Bros than you, so I kind of had a bit of a different feeling when listening to this. Um, excuse me. And I like this album a lot. It was probably the one I was least familiar with, actually. And I think when you get an album like Gash, which is almost like this apocalyptic collision of big brass and shit, it basically I um, I think I actually wrote down something. I haven't got my notes up actually, but I wrote down for Gash. It sounds like somebody dropping an orchestra out of an aircraft.
That's
Um,
that's yeah.
and then uh, what kind of comes after that is the players kind of tuning up their instruments again. And you're right. There is a feeling of this. There is a sort of soundtrack feel to this,
Yeah.
possibly more than anything else he'd done up to this point, and you are really getting the sense that he is moving in that direction, and he's doing all of those things, and he's kind of revealing himself to be more of a composer for things than just doing kind of the art for self-expression's sake. But I think this is a really great record, and like I said, because I'm less familiar with the Venture Bros connection than you, yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I think um, you've got another 8.5 minutes on here. You're trying to break me, which kind of brings back some of that old. He's still capable of whipping up that old frenzy when he wants to.
Yeah.
But that's definitely got less as these records have gone on. Um,
Just like
but
a natural maturing.
it is, yeah, and I think that sense of disaster and whirlwind of sound, that cacophony that he is so good at doing, I think that's still part of who he is, and I think it probably always will be. But I think he has learned that he doesn't need to do that. It's almost like he did that, and on the off chance that something beautiful would come out of it, whereas now it's almost like it's a side of what he does rather than
Yeah,
the thing
exactly.
itself. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what your top five is after this, because it's a it's been really fun listening to these again, and I think um, you know he's a he's clearly a genius when it comes to creativity and learning how to kind of twist quite um, what's the phrase I'm looking for? Formal is the wrong word, mainstream is the wrong word, but taking quite conventional musical themes, filtering through his kind of chaotic um, beginnings, and that going back to his uh, roots of making tapes in his bedroom and going out and recording sound and trying to put these interesting things together that really are just pieces of noise, that's always going to be a part of him. And it's like through all this experimentation, he's found a way to channel that into something that's really quite beautiful. Um, and yeah, it's been really interesting going through this. And I think a bit like David Tibet with Current 93, he is also going to be influenced by who plays with him. And I think those last few releases there, you're getting people who are perhaps a little more composed when it comes to playing their instruments, and
Yeah.
while they're capable of doing all these outlandish and avant-garde things, I think the fact that they're such great players as well clearly inspires him to try things that he wouldn't try on his own.
Yeah, and at this point, he's most likely has like as he continued in his career up until this point, he probably just has more access to higher quality like
Yeah,
instruments or productions and people who have higher quality productions anyway. And it's just like once you get a taste of like that high quality stuff, it's kind of hard to like ever go back and like any remnants of your earlier stuff is just gonna be what that is, just remnants. It's like you'll still hold on to it, but as just any person who wants to progress in life, like you'll just kind of make, little odes to them, like in certain spots. But when it comes to wanting to make something that can get to a broader public, because I would say in a certain way, this might be his most accessible album,
yeah,
just in the pure sense that it does have that soundtrack type of feel. And I think any regular person can like resonate with like a soundtrack stuff because it's in movies, it's in shows, and so I do think this is kind of his like in a certain sense like again we haven't listened to Soak, but a certain type of magnum opus to a degree of like
yeah.
him bringing everything that he has learned and putting it all in one in like a very traditional form of you know orchestral type of sound.
Yeah, it's interesting because he did a lot of collaborations with other people after this, including one of my favourites, if not my favourite, is with the experimental uh, experimental artist. Again, she started with a kind of industrial style and has streamlined that over the years. Zola Jesus. Her real name's Nika Danilova, but she goes under Zola Jesus, and she did a collaborative album with Jim, who orchestrated versions of her songs from her back catalogue back in that was in 2013 that came out, and he has a real sympathy for that, I think, and Hyde, I think, is perhaps Hyde and Love are perhaps the two most obvious indications of where he would then go in the future. Um, and for what it's worth, uh, my top five has all of the records we've discussed today in it. So Hyde is my fifth. I really do like this and I can see myself returning to it. But I do appreciate what you say that it definitely feels like it needs to be applied to something rather than just working in of itself. Um, Gash is my number four. I like the fact that it brought a little bit of chaos back from the early days, um, but he found a way to focus that a little bit more and introduce some straighter rhythmic elements to that. Nail is my number two. It was the first one I heard. It's everybody's favourite, I think, from that early period. I think it's the one of those first three or four releases. I think it's the one where he got it right. And if I want to hear some noise, that is a record I will always go back to. And then my number one, like you, it's Love. I'd heard it before, but I perhaps hadn't truly appreciated how what an artistic achievement it was. Because, like I said, there's a sense on that album that he's just happy to be still doing what he's doing, but it doesn't take away from the power and the emotion on those songs, and they feel like kind of oral distillations of thought, and there's a yearning in there that feels very genuine. It doesn't feel like he's making a soundtrack for something. It feels like that's really coming through him.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe the only time that I feel that listening to this catalogue. But yeah, your top five, Trey.
All right. So I'll start with number five. So as you, yeah, Hyde is my number five. Yeah, and pretty much everything you just said. Like I think this is a very well put together album. Everything's orchestrated and it's and probably better than anything else that he done before then. I guess this is what's keeping it at number five is the fact that like like again feels more like a soundtrack album than a Fetus album. And again, not to take away from like, Jim's creativity on this. It's just I think when it comes to what I like in the sound of Fetus when I first started like hearing it, it's not there, which it doesn't need to be, but at the same time if I were to be realistic about like what I liked about Fetus, it's more of like what the other albums are. But this definitely feels like, and I think I still keep it in number five because it's nostalgic for me, just because of the Venture Bros correlation, and it's just a beautiful piece of music. And like upon first listen, while probably didn't affect me the same way Love did, like I still recognize that this is a great piece of music. So Hyde is number five. Nail is number four. I feel like Nail is for it to be number four is like again, he in the earlier days, this is where he's like establishing a really good sound, and you're starting to get make sense of what he's doing with the Fetus sound. And I feel like it's the best representation of what he was doing in the earlier days before like you get to Flow, where I feel like those earlier sounds are all well put together. But it's just like there's so many things on this track that, again, for me, it's like I think when it comes to the first Fetus song I had ever even heard off of that compilation interview that I remember watching way back in the day, that had Current 93, Coil, Fetus, and that other band. Again, it's kind of just like a what's the word? I can't think of words right now, but you know, I just love the last song on here. It's like it was a good representation of an industrial song. Hold up, I gotta look it up real quick. I think it was Fetus scraping the wheel. Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest reason I need to have this on here. Oh yeah, anything Viva. Like honestly, that's one of my top
Mm,
five favorite Fetus songs. I feel like
yeah,
when it
it's
comes to the
awesome.
earlier days, like especially at that time, I think that was like, yeah, during the scraping Fetus off the wheel era. Like the last song Viva is just like it's like the like
Yeah,
that was my real introduction to Fetus, even before I had any interest in getting into the Fetus catalog, even way back in 2015 when I think I had watched those interviews and I was just like, why does this dude look like he's from the 80s? And like, but is making some weird 80s pop music. Like,
yeah,
I think I have to have Nail on here because like again, it's it's an essential. It's a
it
real
is.
essential.
Yeah, it is.
And then of course we get my third one is Flow. And like I already said, Flow, everything just is flowing together. Like when it comes to the earlier sounds, like this is I think having this at number three is perfect because like it's everything that I loved from the earlier days. And again, like the last song on this album, the 12-minute song was just amazing. Like like I was so immersed in it. Like by the time like I had gotten to the end of the album, and I'm just like, this is like this is a well put together piece of like orchestral music that still has that like that Foetus sound, but it's that song in particular feels like it's doing what like I would want to hear more off of Hyde, whereas
Yeah,
like Jim's more in the mix, whereas Hyde like he's not as in the mix, but like the thoughtfulness of how he's orchestrating everything is just phenomenal on that last song on Flow, and it's kind of just like we got everything together.
yeah,
Number two is gonna be Thaw. I have Thaw
nice.
as number two because it's that was the first Foetus album that I actually really, really liked once I started like once we got through the first four albums, and I'm just like the whole entire time I'm trying to figure out what's going on. But again, I think the reason Thaw is number two for me is because I'm always a fan of like aggressive, intense industrial
Yeah,
sounds. And out of all the artists that we've talked about that's in the experimental industrial realm, this feels like his most industrial, aggressive, just hard hitting album. And it's just getting
yeah,
like, don't hide it, provide it. Just like, one of my top favorite Foetus songs. I just
yeah,
love it. It's
nice one.
just like everything on this album, while maybe all the catchiness is like a little less there, but the feeling of him putting things together feels, just top notch.
Yeah,
And then of course, Love is my number one, and we've already talked about that one.
yeah,
It's just so good. It's
it
just
is.
it feels like him, if
It
anything
does.
else.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but no, that's I think a really great way to kind of cap it off because I agree, it does sound like him just as much as Nail did or Def, but I think it's almost like he kind of purged all that chaos out of him and just wanted to make a emotionally true record that kind of spoke to a different hemisphere of his brain. And I think because of that, I think it's the one that perhaps it might not be the first one I'd play to somebody because I think the chaos is a big part of what he does, but it's certainly the one I would say this is the one if you just want something that's just a really beautiful listen from start to finish. Um, yeah, I would say that's as good as it can get really from what he does. Because he is a master of it when he chooses to do that. Um, yeah, but no, it's been really fun doing this again, and I think I'm interested to hear what everybody else thinks in terms of their top records from Foetus as well, and from Jim generally. We've only touched on the Foetus stuff here, but he's got plenty more where that came from. So um, do let us know what you think. But yeah, what a way to kind of wrap it up. I'm gonna have to go and listen to it again, I think.
Yeah, same. But, all right, guys. Thank you guys for listening. We got through Fetus, and we shall have some more artists in the future that we're going to go through the catalogs. And
For sure.
thank you guys for being part of this journey. And also recommend any other types of artists that you would like to have us listen to. I know that there's been some people in the comment sections of some of our videos where someone's recommended the legendary Pink Dots, which I have listened to one album, and I do feel like I want to get into that one soon. I know we
Yeah,
have a
I'd
few
like to
other
do that.
people we want to talk about beforehand, but I
Yeah,
feel like in the near future, I kind of want to like really dive into that discography since I haven't really checked most of their stuff out besides just the first album.
yeah, that'd be a completely new one to me. So I'm definitely up for doing that. I'm definitely up for doing that.
All right, sweet. All right, guys, you guys have a good day, and we are out.